All right, now we look at chapter 10. All right, now chapter 10 also refers to the guidelines under the Financial Advisors Act. And chapter 10 gives you 5 guidelines. And these guidelines pertain to the notices that we have discussed earlier in this program. Right? Now, if you look at paragraph 2 under chapter 10, you will find these are the guidelines on the conduct of business for execution-related advice. Paragraph 2.1 talks about this particular guideline, GO number 8. All right, and it is issued pursuant to Section 64 of the Financial Advisors Act. And this guideline sets out the standards to be maintained by dealers. All right, underline the word dealers. All right, and their trading representatives. All right, I repeat that. This is a guideline for dealers, right, and the representatives when they provide execution-related advice. All right, take note that they do not apply in circumstances where a dealer or its trading representative merely carries out instructions by a client to buy or sell a specific market products without the dealer or trading representative making any recommendation or given any advice in relation to that specific capital market products, and to a dealer who is exempted from complying with Section 27 of the FAA. Right? Now, Section 27, I believe, is the recommendation to clients. Right? You must have a reasonable basis to make recommendation to a client. That's under Section 27. All right. So the standards on for this execution-related advice, they are consistent with the business conduct requirements imposed on financial advisors who provide stand-alone investment advice. All right. However, taking into account the business model and the modus operandi of dealers, which provide execution-related advice, the MAS has adopted a principle-based approach. All right, underline that, principle-based approach rather than a detailed prescriptive-based approach in these guidelines. So it's based on principles. All right. The MAS expects dealers to adhere to these standards and introduce other practices, processes, and procedures where appropriate to safeguard the interests of their clients. All right, you will now fully understand and know that across this whole Financial Advisors Act, the Financial Advisors Regulations and the notices, and now in the guidelines as well as we are discussing, the key point is customer interest. This is the underlying principle under this particular piece of legislation. All right. Now, then coming down at paragraph 8, there are some definitions relating to the meaning of execution-related advice. You need to underline the two words solely incidental. All right, execution-related advice means advice provided which is solely incidental to the execution activities of a dealer, with no discrete fee charged by the dealer for the advice rendered. All right? And execution activities means either or both of the following as defined under Regulation 34A2 of the Financial Advisors Regulations. Right? So what do execution activities mean? So the answer is dealing in capital market products that are specified products. We have received approval in principle for listing and quotation on. All right, these are the companies going to be listed or are listed for quotation or quoted on any approved exchange or overseas exchange. So any recognized exchange overseas, any recognized foreign overseas exchange is included in this particular guideline. All right, dealing in capital market products that are futures contracts. All right, so that is the definition of execution activities. As I've said a little earlier, the Section 27 of the AA requires the FA to have a reasonable basis, all right, for any recommendation made with respect to any investment product to a person who may be reasonably expected to rely on the recommendation. Right? So the keywords there is reasonably be expected. Right? So this will refer to your retail investors generally, and investors who are not defined as expert or institutional or qualified or accredited. Right? So these are your general group of investors. All right, in which case, as you know by now, Section 27 talks about the advisor giving due consideration to the person's investment objectives, financial situation, and particular needs. All right, this is the whole thing about knowing your client, right? Doing financial needs analysis and then recommending a product that is suitable to a client, or giving financial advisory advices that are suitable for a client to consider. Right? So those are the recommendations on capital market products, and of course, if you're dealing with those products, should put in place adequate systems and processes that commensurate with the size and complexity of the business, right, to ensure compliance. Right? 2.7, just make sure you know that a dealer is expected to have sufficient knowledge of the client's objectives, financial situation, and needs before he advises on sales or purchases of capital market products that are suitable for the client. Thus, it is normally not possible for a dealer to offer such advice to a new client before the relevant information is obtained. As you will know, these are execution related, so the client must be an existing client or an old client. All right, whereby you have done all the know your client and the sales advisory process. All right, so these are execution related, so it pertains generally to an existing client. All right, obtaining relevant information about the client is usually done at a time when the relationship is first established with the client, where execution related advice is provided on an ongoing basis. Note this: a dealer should update the client profile and conduct a needs analysis at a reasonable interval at least once a year. All right, even you are dealing with an existing client and you're talking about execution-related advice, still the client's financial position, financial objectives, and financial needs, or whatever changes that occur over a period of time can be significant. All right, so there's a requirement for a dealer to review the client's profile in relation to even for the execution related advice. Okay? That's 2.8. Right? 2.9 talks about if the client does not want to provide any information requested, the dealer may still proceed with the client's request. However, the dealers must make very sure, all right, to document the decision of the client and say, hey, you do not want to give me in-new information. 1 year has passed, 6 months has passed. And if the client refuses to give you or to give an update, then you need to give a warning to the client that any advice that you have given, all right, will not take into consideration any changes in the client's profile. All right, and then it is the client's responsibility, all right, to ensure that the product that he wants you to execute are suitable. Now, importantly, I just draw your attention to this because I got some personal experiences where clients alleged of mis-selling and parties had to go to court. Now, 2.10 is very important, where products are traded on a margin basis. Now, some of you may or may not know what's margin trading. All right, a dealer should highlight the risks of such products to a client. All right, sometimes when there are margin calls, and if margin calls are not met, then the dealer may have to sell away whatever you have in order to make the margin. All right, so margin trading is a high risk business, and if clients are involved in margin trading, then the dealer should highlight how the margin trading works and the risk associated with not meeting the margin when the time comes. Okay, so that covers the recommendation on capital market products in relation to the execution-related advice. Now, very quickly, it's the same story, especially because it's execution-related advice, right? So if you look at paragraph C, that's important for dealers. Documentation and recording. All right? A dealer is expected to maintain proper records and to be able to demonstrate, all right, from day one, as I've said a couple of times over this program, from day one to demonstrate the basis of the recommendation made to a client to sell or to buy, and warnings provided either in the form of a file note or tapes of the telephone conversation. Right? The keeping of these details is also sensible protection for the dealer. Yeah. All right. So we do not want any argument. You say, I say, and when as time goes by, you forget what has been said. All right. So therefore, do not leave all these things to chances. So have them properly documented, right, and recorded. So especially now with the digital platform for parties to communicate, normally by phone or by WhatsApp or by text messages. All right, so just be very careful. All right, it's a sensible protection for the dealer and part and parcel of maintaining good customer relationships. All right, so we do not want any argument as what has been said and whether there's any miscommunications in what has been said. All right. Sometimes what you say may not be what the other fellow heard, right? The other guy heard. So disputes often arise. Right. Now, 2.12 of the paragraph C says the nature of the records to be kept is best determined by the dealer. All right. And my advice always has been in such a way that you can reconstruct the deal. Right. You can reconstruct the deal from day one. Right. Taking into account nature of the business and the likelihood of the particular client disputing that advice, right, was rendered without due consideration of his investment objectives, financial situation, and needs. All right. So as I've said before a few times in this program, client makes money, he laughs to the bank. Client loses money, well, he alleges that the dealer gives him bad advice or did not give enough consideration to his financial situation and financial objectives and stuff like that. Okay, so please be careful if you are a financial advisor representative or you're a dealer in this particular guideline or a dealer representative. Right? Now, as best practices, a dealer should keep such a record for at least 6 years. Right? Do you know why 6 years? Well, I've already explained to you earlier. 6 years is the limitation period for contract. All right. Now you'll notice that in this program, sometimes they ask you to keep 5 years, at least 5 years, right? In terms of, for example, records on money laundering and terrorism financing and other records. All right. But in this particular case here, they are giving you the guideline to keep such records for at least 6 years, right? Now, 6 years meaning because of contract law, this is a limitation period. All right, after 6 years, the client cannot come back and sue the dealer, all right, for bad advice. All right, primarily it's a time bar period, right? From the last date of the closing of the transaction, then you got to run 6 years. Then the client is not able to sue you, or at least you can rely on the limitation, the time bar period. So 6 years is important for you in terms of this particular guideline. Now, similarly, under paragraph D, there is this disclosure of conflicts of interest. All right, and you will know that this is under section 36 of the Financial Advisors Act, which we have done earlier. So section 36 looks at conflict of interest, and here's the same thing. All right, at paragraph 2.14, 2.14. All right, so you got to be a bit careful on this one. Now here it covers that a dealer is not required to repeat such disclosure of conflict of interest each time that an execution-related advice is rendered under the following circumstances. All right. So you may have the customer calling you so frequently to execute a deal. All right. And so long as you have disclosed the conflict of interest to the client either orally or in writing, all right, then you're fine. All right. So therefore, there's no need really to disclose each and every time, but you need to be very careful on that as well. All right. But of course, the best practice is to inform the client. All right. Each time that the client calls you up for execution-related advice. right, before or at the time when the execution-related advice is rendered. All right, but 22.14, 2.14 talks about where there's no need to repeat, provided under the following circumstances. All right, A, the previous disclosure remains up to date, comprehensive, and accurate. All right, that means if the client calls in for you to execute a deal and then you have disclosed the interest before, so there's no need to repeat, so long as the previous disclosure is up to date. All right, comprehensive and accurate. And it can be reasonably expect the client to be fully aware of the previous disclosure. Right? So a dealer should take into account the following when considering whether a client may reasonably be expected to be fully aware of a previous disclosure. One, whether or not there's a long lapse of time between the previous disclosure and the current recommendation or advice. All right, so if the client has not been calling you for the last 6 months or 1 year for a deal, then maybe the 6 months and 1 year, well, it's a bit long, and therefore you may need to disclose any conflict of interest in terms of the interest held by the dealer. All right, and you're recommending the client to do the same or otherwise with a particular deal. Right? So the time is a factor, or where the client is reasonably likely to draw an inference that the previous disclosure no longer applies in the context of the current recommendation or advice. Right? You see client calling you to execute this deal or that deal and ask you for a recommendation. And if there's any conflict of interest situation in that the dealer or the representative is holding some similar interest or the same interest, then you need to disclose. All right. Then paragraph E talks about the disclaimer. So you must have formal disclaimer in documents to clients to the effect that dealers are in the business of providing execution-only services. All right. They do not provide advice to clients. If such disclaimers are made, the dealer should put in place appropriate systems, procedures, and training to ensure that the dealers themselves or the representatives do not provide any advice to clients. All right, and finally, 2.16 regarding this issue of disclaimer. All right, so notwithstanding any formal disclaimers to the contrary, the dealers are subject to statutory provisions if they provide advice to clients. All right. All right. In addition, any disclaimers to the effect that advice given by dealers should not be assumed to have taken into account the investment objectives, financial situation, and needs of a client, or their clients should independently assess whether advice is appropriate for them, will not, underline the word not, will not absolve dealers of the statutory obligations and liabilities imposed under the FAA. All right, this one put a big star there, right? So you're very careful when you deal with the customers. All right, notwithstanding the disclaimers that you made, if you do go into financial advice services under the Act, then no matter what types of disclaimers you make, will not absolve dealers of the statutory obligations and liabilities under the FAA. And the MAS will enforce these provisions of the FAA to ensure that clients enjoy the protection accorded to them under the FAA. In other words, they do not want dealers to go around the provisions of the FAA in this regard. Right? So that covers the guideline in terms of execution-related advice. That is simple enough, I guess. Now let's look at paragraph 3, guidelines on structured deposits. Now again, this is similar to the notice on structured deposits, which we have talked about earlier. All right. So these particular guidelines and these guidelines apply to any licensed or exempt financial advisor or its representative who advises on any structured deposit, except, right? Note the word except. Right. So again, you look at A, advice is given to accredited investor, expert investor, institutional investor, as defined under Regulation 2.1 of the Financial Advisors Regulations. All right. If you are providing advice to this group of people, then the guidelines do not apply to you. Right. So B, where advice is given to high net worth individual as defined by the guidelines on the exemption for specialized units serving high net worth individuals under the particular section. Section 100(2), subsection 2 of the FAA, by a separate and distinct department or division or section or unit. All right. So if there's this special section, special unit set up to advise high net worth clients, all right, as the case may be, either a financial advisor or an exempt financial advisor, all right, then you are okay. All right, in relation to not following the guidelines for unstructured deposits. All right, so there's one there, the accredited investor and the expert investor and the institutional investor, and two there under the special unit, separate and distinct separate units serving high net worth clients. Or C, where advice is given to any person outside Singapore. All right, so you are doing structured deposit, you are giving advice to any person outside Singapore who is an individual and not a citizen of Singapore, not a permanent resident of Singapore, and not wholly or partly dependent on a citizen or permanent resident of Singapore, or in any other case, a person with no commercial or physical presence in Singapore. All right, so if I'm advising on structured products relating to paragraph C, people outside Singapore, individual, not citizen, not permanent resident, not wholly dependent on the Singapore citizen or the permanent resident, or a person who is not connected in any way, commercial or physical presence in Singapore, then there's an exception there for you not to follow the guideline FAAGO number 9. All right, so what are the purposes of this guideline on structured deposits? So the guidelines here set out the standards of conduct expected of licensed and exempt financial advisors and their representatives when advising on structured products. Right? They provide general guidance and are not intended to replace or override any provisions or written directions imposed or issued by the under the FAA by the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Now 3.3 sounds a warning there. As a matter of good business practice, licensed and exempt financial advisors and representatives are encouraged to apply these guidelines when advising on any other deposits which are linked to complex financial instruments which do not fall within the definition of structured deposit under the FAA, including those with returns linked to a commodity price. All right, here the guideline is broad. They say, the structured deposits have been defined, but then if you are looking at other complex financial instruments that do not fall under the definition of structured deposits under the FAA, then you also may need to follow the guidelines given in this particular FAA GO 9. Okay, it's a pretty open concept there. The spirit of this notice, the spirit of this set of guidelines are to make sure that when you are dealing with complex financial products, all right, then you need to follow the guidelines here, especially if these complex financial instruments are recommended to retail clients, right? To retail customers, right? All right, and then at B there is a caution again in relation to the use of the term structured deposit. Now, I just read to you very quickly to make sure that you are with me here. A structured deposit is a type of deposit and not, I emphasize the word, not a unique class of financial instrument. It's just a type, it's not a class. All right, now deposit has been defined in the Banking Act and has a generally understood meaning. All right, a deposit is a relatively safe product, right? Relatively safe. And if you label a product as a structured product, as a structured deposit, all right, in any marketing material or product disclosure document, when it does not bear out the characteristics of a deposit, it's tantamount to a misleading conduct. All right. In other words, just be careful how you use the word deposit in relation to these sophisticated financial instruments. As investors may misconstrue that the product has the characteristic of a deposit. In other words, a bank deposit, a savings deposit, or a fixed deposit, when in fact it is not. All right, so there is some confusion out there, and if the financial advisor representative, if he is not careful in explaining the risk and the complexity related to this structured deposit or the structured products, then it can be a it can tantamount to misleading conduct. Here they are very clear, 3.5, paragraph 3.5. Financial advisor or its representative should not use the title or description deposit or structured deposit to describe an investment product unless the product being offered falls within the definition of a deposit or structured deposit. Alright, the 3.5 gives you a further definition that the above requirement, the requirements do not apply. In relation to a structured deposit, there's a dual currency investment. Alright, so there are some technical issues there in relation to what's a dual currency investment, which we have done in the earlier chapters. And I've also spoken a little bit about this in terms of the use of the word deposit in relation to structured products or structured deposits. Now then C talks about product information disclosure. There's a long list there. Now I just want to highlight to you 3.7 for those of you who may not be familiar with structured products. Now just read 3.7 generally to you. Although a structured deposit is a relatively safe instrument, returns on such products are variable and are often contingent on the performance of complex financial instruments. The underlying asset may be very complex that the average retail investor may not fully understand. Right? Now, furthermore, investing in a structured deposit entails certain risks, including potential loss of the principal sum invested. Underline that, okay? So a retail investor may not understand that if you buy a structured deposit product, right, the retail client may lose the principal sum, totally gone, right, if the investment is not held to maturity, right? So there are risks involved, right? So it's not that liquid, and you stand to lose money if the market for the underlying product moves against you, right? Now, this risk should be clearly disclosed to every investor to ensure that the investor is able to make an informed investment decision. In general, a financial advisor or its representatives advising on such structured deposits should ensure that the product information disclosure for all publications used by the advisor or the rep, including market material, is clear, adequate, not false, not misleading. And every financial advisor is encouraged to review its product information disclosure, ensure that the documents are up to date, right, and adhere to the required standards. All right, now 3.10, I do not want to go into the details. If you look down the page, you will find that this is what you have to inform the client in your product information disclosure document. Right, under paragraph 3.10, all A to G. Right. So all the way from A to H. Right? There's a H across the page there, and in particular H, I must read to you this one. Information that the structured deposit is not an insured deposit for the purpose of the Deposit Insurance and Policy Owners Protection Schemes Act. All right, if you put fixed deposit with the bank, well, the bank can buy insurance, all right, in terms of this deposit insurance. Having said this, it is clear also when you put money in the bank, fixed deposit in the bank, fixed deposit in the bank, fixed deposit in the bank, fixed deposit